Today's scripture reading comes from James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26. My brothers and sisters, what good is it if people say they have faith but do nothing to show it? Claiming to have faith can't save anyone, now can it? Imagine a brother or sister who is naked and never has enough food to eat. What if one of you said, "Go in peace, stay warm, have a nice meal"? What good is it if you don't actually give them what their body needs? In the same way, faith is dead when it doesn't result in faithful activity. Someone might claim, "You have faith and I have action. But how can I see your faith apart from your actions? Instead, I'll show you my faith by putting it into practice in faithful action." It's good that you believe that God is one. Even the demons believe this and they tremble with fear. Are you so slow? Do you need to be shown that faith without actions has no value at all? What about Abraham, our father? Wasn't he shown to be righteous through his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? See, his faith was at work along with his actions. In fact, his faith was made complete by his faithful actions. So the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and God regarded him as righteous. What is more, Abraham was called God's friend. So you see that a person is shown to be righteous through faithful actions and not through faith alone. In the same way, wasn't Rahab the prostitute shown to be righteous when she received the messengers as her guest and then sent them on by another road? As the lifeless body is dead, so faith without actions is also dead.
As I shared with you all a couple of weeks ago, I had originally scheduled to begin a 12-week sabbatical on May 15th. But with recent absences related to 2 back surgeries and a resulting infection, I talked with our elders and our council and decided to change that to a 9-week sabbatical during June and July. So for this Sunday and next, I felt led to share some parting reflections. I say I felt led because really I didn't look at any particular themes and try to match it up with Scripture. I simply prayed, and I waited for God to reveal to me what might be beneficial for you and I to hear before I leave you for a couple of months. Out of all of Scripture, I found myself directed to this morning's Scripture from James. It was, I can say, a bit surprising to me to be led there because you don't hear a lot of sermons from James. It's one of the very small epistles found in the New Testament after the more popular Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and after most of Paul's letters to the early church. So it's really easy to skip right on over to Revelation and ignore the lessons of the smaller books of the Bible like James. Upon further study, because admittedly I'd never delved real deeply into James myself, the book of James is considered by most biblical scholars as a wisdom text. Like all the books of the New Testament, the author of James was writing to the early Christian community, those still trying to figure out their way after the death of Jesus. And because this James writing seemed to be circulated in the 2nd century, Jesus' life and death would be over 100 years old. It would be no wonder then that many folks would have long signed off to this Jesus trend and moved on to their other beliefs, maybe returned to their original beliefs or the ideas of atheists and agnostics. In other words, this writing would have landed on the ears of an ancient community which was diverse, confused, had disagreement about if there was a God, and if so, what God expected. Any of that sound familiar to us? I spent a lot of time during the past 10 weeks watching television. And as a self-admitted political junkie, I guess if you're going to be limited to a lot of time laying down and watching TV, this is a good time to do it. For certainly everyone here knows full well that right now there is a huge divide in our society and a huge difference of opinion on if there is a God And if so, how God expects us to act. My, oh my, how we can complicate things. Wow, how we can complicate things. If we'd only pull out the scripture we claim to hold so dear, the sacred text we say is the authority for our lives, if only folks would resist these incorrect sound bites when scripture is taken out of context, and instead look to historical meaning and the original audience to which the text was written, I think we'd come to agreement on much of what divides us as a country, indeed as a world. Here is James. He's trying to give an important lesson on the marriage of show and tell. Now, my guess is that most of us, just like the kids here who were up front, most of us have experienced show and tell in our lives. Perhaps in school, when our teachers invited us to bring something from home and explain its meaning. Perhaps to a gathering of friends or family when we bring something new we've purchased or someone's given to us and we explain and share its meaning. And can't we agree that while we might talk about something important to us, when we can give a specific example or show the item itself, it adds depth and meaning to our words? Indeed, I'm more aware of the Lexington Legends baseball schedule, having had Vincent share that with me. In essence, this is what James is talking about. The marriage of show and tell, the marriage of faith and works. And James, again writing to this specific community who were trying to find the balance between their faith and their place in the world, James is calling folks to abandon an empty religion. That is, a religion that professes and pontificates a lot of right belief, but doesn't show that belief in their actions. Faith and works are married in such a way that it is not that our actions substitute for our beliefs. Rather, our actions reveal our beliefs by bringing them alive. In the case of the ancient community, which had a large group of poor and marginalized among them, James was saying, listen, you can't say you believe we are equal in God's eyes. You can't say that everyone is beloved and a child of God. You cannot say that the most vulnerable and marginalized are welcomed fully into your community. You can't say all these things without acting upon them. Or as I was often reminded during my growing up years from my mama, actions speak louder than words. This week, our Christian brothers and sisters in the United Methodist Church held their general conference, one held every 4 years. It's similar to many other mainline denominations, including our own United Church of Christ, where clergy and delegates join denominational leadership for learning seminars, for worship, for some important declarations and decisions from their denominational leaders. Our own Doug and Rita Swan have been active in past years in the United Methodist Church General Conference, having been successful in introducing and having passed important declarations about the abuse and rights of children. I know others in our church have strong ties to Methodism. Carol Stiles has some Methodists in her, I believe. And again, I know there are others in our church family. You may or may not know that my dear friend that you hear a lot about and got to meet this year, my dear friend Marsha McPhee, is a cradle Methodist. She is also married now for some 14 years to Jordan Decker, who in the past 4 years has transitioned from female to male. Marsha and Jordan were powerful in sharing their story when they joined us this past January to celebrate our 5th anniversary. Another acquaintance of mine, Mark Miller, an incredible musician who writes a lot of the music we sing, is also a cradle Methodist. Mark and his husband live in the Northeast with their adopted children. 4 years ago, Marsha designed and led all the worship worship services for the General Conference of the Methodist Gathering in Florida, and Mark was key to the music. They were powerful worship services designed by a woman married to a transgender man and a man married to another man. I watched those worship services to learn and to experience worship, even though it was through my computer. And I also watched painful debates outside of worship surrounding the issues of sexuality, and specifically whether the Methodist Church would include the LGBT community among their clergy as part of the sacrament of marriage and in other church leadership positions. There were threats those 4 years ago of arresting those advocating for the LGBT community. Methodists have been debating this issue for many, many years, and in truth, many of those who support full inclusion of the LGBT community have left the church. That's how we got Doug and Rita Swan. And in truth, many of those who do not believe the LGBT community belong in church leadership have left denominations such as ours and found their way to another place. Now, there's someone else I have a lot of respect for and to whom you should either thank or shame, and that's my former professor at Lexington Theological Seminary, Dr. Wes Allen. He was my professor of preaching and worship. Wes, too, is a cradle Methodist. Dr. Allen is now professor of homiletics at Perkins School of Theology, a Methodist seminary. This week on his Facebook page, Wes posted, and I quote, "I am so disappointed and frankly embarrassed by the General Conference of the United Methodist Church. To be honest, I had little hope of the church making the move to full inclusion of LGBTQI folks. I believe is the just, righteous, and holy position to be taken. But the behavior of many individuals, and indeed of the body as a whole, at least as constantly and repeatedly reported in the news and social edit, is hard to reconcile with the name church." My friends, Dr. Allen was given an example, in my opinion, of the divorce of faith and works. A professed love for God leading to a conviction to love all neighbors as we love ourselves. Repeated instructions in Scripture to welcome the marginalized, to stand up for justice and the oppressed. To make room in our church families for the stranger much different from us. And yet denominations and churches continue to be places where people of power and privilege decide who's in and who's out. We all know that the Bible has been used by conservatives to silence women and uphold slavery. Do you remember those days? Today it's used to justify oppression and denial of civil rights to the LGBT community. It's used to support privilege and wealth for some while others suffer in dire poverty. And I don't know about you, friends, but I'm growing so sick of the political rhetoric and endorsements of so-called faith leaders and communities, of candidates who profess faith but act like the devil in our midst. Are these things the marriage of our faith and our works? Our faith and our action? Do the things we tell others about our faith match what we show others about our faith? Well, I've picked a bit at the Methodist. And I've picked some at the ancient community. And I've picked a bit at the current political climate and rhetoric. Well, now it's time for me to pick a bit at us. Right when we were ready to jump on one of those bandwagons and point our judgmental fingers. Church family, how do we marry show and tell at Bluegrass? First, as a community. If an outsider came into our church simply to observe, that outsider might be called a visitor. What feedback might they give us if we would ask? Would they be able to tell who has the power of the church and who is just someone who attends? Would they witness any cliques, those subgroups who seem to be in the know, or those who have been coming here a long time versus others who just started attending and are searching for a way to really belong and fully feel a part of our church family? Would they see some folks sitting together week after week while others sit by themselves week after week? If someone found their way into the fellowship hall before or after worship, and then they ventured over to our bulletin board, would they get any idea of our church, of what we do, of what we believe? And if they looked at our church budget, would it match what we say is important? Our challenge as a church, and my challenge to you as your spiritual leader, is to ask in every aspect of what we do, in worship, in meetings, in budget, in informal gatherings, is our show and tell married? Do we act as we say we believe? And in my weeks of sabbatical, I am going to slice every aspect of our church to examine from my perspective if our works match our faith. And you know what? I invite you to do the same thing. For when I get back, I want to have some intentional discussions about that. We celebrate a lot about where we've been, and that's a good thing. We should all be so proud of what we have built together these 5.5 years. And yet, I got to tell you, I'm much more concerned about where we're going, about the what next for Bluegrass, about the next stretch for me as your pastor and for you as beloved and necessary parts of the family. The marriage of show and tell. How about as an individual? My brothers and sisters, how do you marry show and tell relative to your faith and relative to your membership at Bluegrass? If your colleagues didn't know whether or not you were a person of faith, would they be able to tell by your actions? How about your family and your friends? If someone listens to our language or has an inside scoop on our relationships with significant others, would they know that we are people of faith? What if someone scrolled your Facebook post or comments? What if someone followed us around to see how we spend our time and energy? Would they conclude that our faith is a priority in our life? If someone documents how you spend your time, who you spend it with, what's included in your checkbook register, would our professed faith match up with our actions? In the months of June and July, it might be tempting for you to join me in my sabbatical. And I want to encourage you to do that in one way and to not do that in another. The way I hope you do not join me in my sabbatical is in the literal sense. That is, don't stay away from church because the pastor's gone. We have some committed elders who are not only wonderful preachers in their own right and deep persons of faith, but they're going to spend a lot of time preparing for worship services in my absence. Your presence and your support is going to mean a lot to them. And you know what? I believe it's going to mean more to you because it's the space that only you can fill week after week. So I challenge you and I encourage you and I appeal to you to open your hearts and minds to the diversity of voices that will fill the pulpit each week. And my, oh my, join me in giving thanks for the willingness and the ability of those elders to serve our church in this way. Now here's how I want you to join me in my sabbatical. I hope you will take time to give an honest assessment of how your faith matches up with your actions. And I intend to do the same exercise. And Brent and I will even do that as a couple. Does what we profess as our priorities match up with how we spend our time, our resources, and our energy? What adjustments might we make, and how will we solidify our marriage of show and tell? So church, I want you to join me. I want you to join me individually, as a couple if you're fortunate enough to have that relationship, and certainly as a church family. I want you to join me in examining how our faith and our actions come alive. Active faith by individuals and by the church demands a sharing of gifts and a providing of space that God sends to us unexpectedly. So church, let's spend the summer getting married up. Our faith and our works, our faith and our actions, our faith and our relationships with one another, our faith with our involvement in our community, our faith and our acceptance of all who belong. May we indeed draw the circle wide. Let's spend the summer getting married up. In other words, let's match our walk with our talk. Y'all ready?
Yes.
Who's in? Let's do it.